The film opens with sweeping aerial shots of a rugged, desolate coastline, emphasizing the isolation and raw beauty of the sea. We then cut to a car winding its way along a narrow, dusty road. Inside the car are Drew and May, two sisters who are clearly close but share a relationship marked by unspoken tension. Their conversation is casual yet layered with subtle hints of past conflicts and unresolved emotions. Drew, the more cautious and reserved of the two, seems to be the planner, while May is more carefree and adventurous. Their dynamic is established through playful banter and shared memories, but there's an undercurrent of unease that suggests their bond has been tested in the past. As they arrive at their destination, a remote cliffside overlooking the ocean, the sisters begin unpacking their diving gear. The location is breathtaking but isolated, with no signs of other people nearby. May double-checks everything, while Drew teases her for being overly cautious. This exchange reinforces their personalities and sets up the stakes for the challenges they'll face. Once they're suited up, the sisters make their way to the edge of the cliff. The girls are hesitant but excited as they prepare to dive into the deep blue below. As they leap into the water, we see a stunning underwater cinematography, showcasing the vibrant marine life and the serene, otherworldly beauty of the ocean. Drew and May swim together, exploring the underwater landscape with a sense of wonder and camaraderie. They navigate through narrow caves and swim alongside schools of fish, their movements fluid and synchronized. The tranquility of the scene is underscored by a haunting score, which subtly builds tension as the sisters venture deeper into the ocean. As they continue their dive, the sisters encounter a series of underwater caves. The tight, claustrophobic spaces create a sense of unease, even as the sisters remain calm and focused. Their communication is limited to hand signals and shared glances, further highlighting their deep connection and mutual trust. Without warning, a sudden rockslide occurs, trapping May under a pile of debris, separating the two sisters. Drew's heart pounds in her chest as she spins around, her torchlight cutting through the murky darkness in desperate arcs. She tries to call out to May through their communication system, her voice trembling with panic. Static crackles in her earphones, and for a moment, there is nothing but silence. Drew's breathing quickens, the sound of her regulator echoing loudly in her ears. She forces herself to stay calm, knowing that panic will only waste precious oxygen. Suddenly, a faint voice breaks through the static. It is May, her voice strained but alive. She tells Drew that she is trapped and does not know where she is. The relief Drew feels is fleeting, replaced by a surge of adrenaline as she realizes the gravity of the situation. May is hurt, trapped, and running out of time. Drew's mind races as she tries to pinpoint May's location. She urges May to stay with her and keep talking so she can find her. Drew swims deeper into the darkness, her torchlight illuminating the jagged walls of the underwater caves. The narrow passages feel claustrophobic, and the weight of the ocean above her presses down like a physical force. Every second feels like an eternity as she navigates the treacherous terrain, her movements careful but urgent. The sound of her own breathing is deafening, a constant reminder of the limited oxygen in her tank. Finally, Drew spots a faint glow in the distance. It is May's flashlight, its beam flickering weakly through the debris. Drew swims toward it as fast as she can, her heart pounding in her chest. When she reaches May, the sight is both a relief and a nightmare. May is pinned under a massive boulder, her leg trapped against the sea floor. Her face is pale, and her breathing is shallow, but she manages a weak smile when she sees Drew. Drew does not waste a second. She grabs the boulder with both hands and tries to lift it, her muscles straining against the weight. But it is no use, the rock is immovable. May shakes her head and tells Drew that it is too heavy. She insists that Drew must go back to the surface and get help. Drew protests, but May cuts her off, her voice growing weaker. She reminds Drew that there is no time to argue and that her oxygen is almost out. She urges Drew to go now. Reluctantly, Drew agrees. May gives her instructions on where to find spare oxygen tanks and suggests using a car jack from their vehicle to lift the boulder. She tells Drew that it is in the trunk and pleads with her to hurry. Drew nods, her eyes filled with determination. She promises May that she will be back. Drew swims to the surface, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. When she breaks through the water, she gasps for air, her body trembling with exhaustion. She removes her gear and sprints toward their car, her wet suit clinging to her skin. The car is locked, and Drew curses under her breath. She grabs a rock and smashes the window, her hands shaking as she reaches inside to unlock the door. She tries to open the trunk, but it is electronically locked and requires the car to be turned on. With no time to waste, Drew grabs a map from the car and studies it, her fingers tracing the shortest route back to the dive site. She takes off running, her legs burning with effort as she navigates the rocky terrain. The sun is beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. Drew's mind is a whirlwind of fear and determination. She cannot lose May. Not like this. As she reaches the cliffside, Drew spots a small boat in the distance. Her heart leaps with hope. She waves her arms and shouts at the top of her lungs, but the boat is too far away to hear her. Drew hesitates, torn between waiting for potential rescuers and diving back in to save her sister. Time is running out. She looks down at the spare oxygen tank and makes her decision. She will have to do this alone. Just as Drew is about to dive back into the water, she accidentally drops the oxygen tank. It tumbles over the edge of the cliff and disappears into the waves below. Without a second thought, Drew leaps after it, her body slicing through the water as she swims toward the sinking tank. Underwater, Drew's torchlight flickers as she navigates the narrow passages. She reaches May just as her sister's oxygen tank runs out. Drew quickly hands her the spare tank, and May takes a deep, shuddering breath. For a moment, they just look at each other, their eyes filled with a mix of relief and fear. Drew tells May that she promised to come back, her voice trembling. May manages a weak smile and replies that she never doubted her. They share a quiet moment, their bond stronger than ever. But the danger is not over yet. Drew hesitates for a moment before admitting that she lost one of the spare oxygen tanks somewhere in the sea during her frantic search. May's eyes widen with concern, but she nods, urging Drew to leave her current air tank behind as she goes to retrieve the lost one. Drew hesitates, torn between staying with her sister and ensuring they have enough oxygen to survive. Reluctantly, she agrees, leaving her tank with May and swimming off into the darkness. As Drew disappears into the murky depths, May notices something alarming. The air tank Drew left behind is leaking oxygen. The faint hiss of escaping air sends a wave of panic through her. She tries to stay calm, reminding herself that panicking will only use up more oxygen, but the reality of her situation is inescapable. Meanwhile, Drew swims through the underwater caves, her torchlight flickering as she searches for the lost tank. Her lungs burn, and her muscles ache, but she pushes through the pain, driven by the knowledge that May's life depends on her. Finally, she spots the tank lying on the sea floor, partially buried in sand. She grabs it and swims back to May as fast as she can, her heart pounding with every stroke. When Drew reaches May, she quickly hands her the oxygen tank. May takes a few desperate breaths, her relief palpable. Drew then transfers May's damaged tank to her own back, ensuring her sister has a steady supply of air. May looks at Drew with a mixture of gratitude and frustration, asking why she didn't bring the car jack. Drew explains that she lost the car keys in her haste and that her only focus was getting back to May before she ran out of oxygen. May's expression softens, but she insists that Drew needs to go back to the surface and fix the damaged tank. She emphasizes the importance of finding the car jack, as it might be their only chance to free her. Drew nods, her determination renewed. She swims to the surface, her body heavy with exhaustion. When she reaches the shore, she sprints to the car. She tries to open the trunk again, but it remains locked. Desperation sets in as she realizes that the car jack might be their only hope. She looks around, her eyes landing on a nearby house in the distance. May had warned her that the house was too far, but Drew feels she has no other choice. She takes off running, her legs burning with effort as she navigates the rocky terrain. When Drew reaches the man-made structure, she screams for help, her voice hoarse and desperate. But the place is empty, abandoned. She circles the building, her frustration mounting, until she finds a window. Without hesitation, she breaks it and climbs inside. The interior is dim and dusty, but Drew's eyes quickly land on a juice bottle. She grabs it and drinks greedily, her throat parched from exhaustion. She then takes out her map and writes a desperate plea for help, circling the location where May is trapped. She also finds a hammer, hoping it might help her break into the car. Drew runs back to the car, her hope flickering like a dying flame. She tries to use the hammer to force open the trunk, but it is no use. In a final act of desperation, she pushes the car off the cliff, hoping the impact might open the trunk. She scrambles down to the shore and finds the trunk partially open. Her heart leaps with hope, but when she searches for the car jack, it is nowhere to be found. Drew falls to the ground, her emotions overwhelming her. All her efforts have been for nothing. A few minutes later, Drew forces herself to stand. She picks up a stick, hoping it'll help her release May. With a deep breath, she jumps back into the water, diving deeper into the sea. When she reaches May, she finds her sister disoriented and speaking incoherently. Drew tries to calm her, explaining that the lack of oxygen and the pressure of being underwater for so long might be causing her to hallucinate. She reassures May that what she is seeing is not real. Drew then uses the stick to try to lift the boulder off May's leg, but it does not budge. May's hope begins to fade, and she tells Drew to leave her behind. She says that she loves her and that Drew should not blame herself for what happens. She makes Drew promise to save herself and get to the surface. But Drew refuses to give up. She comes up with a desperate plan, to inflate their life jacket and wedge it under the boulder, hoping it might provide enough leverage to lift the rock. They work together, their movements slow and deliberate. The rock begins to shift slightly, but the effort drains Drew's oxygen reserves. May watches helplessly as Drew struggles, her own hope slipping away. She tells Drew again that she loves her and urges her to save herself. Drew's heart aches as she looks at May, her sister's face pale and her breathing shallow. She refuses to give up, as she cannot, and will not, leave her sister to die. With a determined look, she removes her air tank and places it beside May, ensuring her sister has enough oxygen to survive while she makes one last desperate attempt to save them both. As Drew ascends, the water grows lighter, but her mind remains heavy with fear and determination. She breaks through the surface, gasping for air, and scans the shoreline for anything that might help. Meanwhile, deep below the surface, May's mind begins to drift. The lack of oxygen and the crushing pressure of the ocean play tricks on her, pulling her into a hallucination. She sees herself and Drew as children, playing in the water on a sunny day. Their laughter echoes in her ears, a stark contrast to the cold, dark reality she is trapped in. Drew swims down to May as fast as she can, the air tire filler clutched tightly in her hand. When she reaches her sister, she quickly explains her plan. She takes the life jacket they had tried to use earlier and attaches the air tire filler to its valve. With trembling hands, she begins to pump air into the jacket, her movements frantic but purposeful. The jacket slowly inflates, its buoyancy creating pressure against the boulder. Drew's heart pounds as she watches, her breath held in anticipation. After what feels like an eternity, the rock begins to shift. The life jacket, now fully inflated, pushes against the boulder with enough force to lift it slightly. May feels the weight on her leg lessen and, with a surge of adrenaline, pulls herself free. The relief on her face is palpable, but it is short-lived. Drew, who has been holding her breath for too long, begins to lose consciousness. Her movements slow, and her grip on the tire filler weakens. Without hesitation, May grabs Drew and begins swimming toward the surface. Her own body is weak from hours of being trapped, but the thought of losing her sister gives her the strength to push through the pain. Finally, they break through the surface, gasping for air. May drags Drew to the shore, her legs collapsing beneath her as they reach the rocky beach. Drew coughs and sputters, her body trembling as she regains consciousness. May turns to Drew, tears streaming down her face, and pulls her into a tight embrace. Drew clings to her sister, her own tears mixing with the salt water on her skin.